Hi everyone, welcome to everyone who joined today. My name is Chloe, I'm the representative here at PBA Galleries, and I'm happy to welcome you all for what's going to be a very exciting talk. So before we get started, I'm going to introduce very quickly both of our speakers. As you all know, our guest today is David Lance Goines, who's a master printer and graphic artist. He has been producing posters for over 50 years, mainly as promotions for local businesses and events. And in 1973, he paired with another Berkeley institution, Alice Waters' restaurant, Chez Panisse, and he has produced a poster celebrating its birthday every year since. He will be speaking with our moderator today, Christopher Dunlop, who's the food and drinks specialist here at PBA Galleries. And he also handles art and photography sales, as well as press books. So we'll be speaking about 30 minutes in a conversation, and then we will have a dedicated time for a Q&A session by the end. So if you have any question, any comments that pop out, just leave them in the chat, and we will make sure to get to them by the end of the session, and so that you can ask everything you want to David Lance Goines. So welcome, David. And Chris, the floor is yours.
Chloe, thank you. And thank you, David, for your hospitality here. We're coming to you from his print studio here in Berkeley. So I'm just going to ask some questions. We'll see where the conversation goes. Okay. We are interested in the sort of convergence of St. Hieronymus Press and Chez Panisse. So maybe you can tell us how you first met Alice Waters and about your early days in Berkeley.
Sure. Alice and I met in 1966, in June of 1966. She was the press liaison for the Bob Scheer for Congress. And so she came by every afternoon at 4 o'clock to check on the press and bring new things to me. And every afternoon at 4:30, I took her over to my house and we had coffee and cognac. I lived on the corner, so it was a half-block walk. And that very quickly turned her not going home at all. And so she and I began developing our interests that we didn't know we had. I was teaching calligraphy, and Alice was learning to cook. And she met a friend of ours, Lindsay Shear, who was a masterful cook, who also lived on this block. And so Lindsay taught Alice to cook, and I played chess with her husband, Charles. And we would throw dinner parties every week for different friends. And Alice learned to cook, and I learned to do artwork. And together we collaborated on a cookbook for a newspaper called the San Francisco Express-Times. And that was turned into one of the books that I printed early called 30 Recipes Suitable for Framing, which did incredibly well and just shockingly well.
So Alice learned some calligraphy.
Yes, she was my first
as well. Student. And how about your cooking?
It got better.
Had you had any background in cooking before?
Yes, my mother and grandmother were very good cooks.
Okay. So I'm especially curious about the way that you've kind of mutually sort of influenced each other.
Very much so.
And I'm also interested in the way that, say an ordinary print shop would have been run at the time and how an ordinary kitchen would have been run at the time.
Well, it was very different. I printed here. I was printing basically all the left-wing stuff that was in the Bay Area. We were sort of the official left-wing printers, and Alice was beginning to realize that the ingredients she needed and wanted weren't available. They didn't exist. And so it was a gradual process of currying favor with people who grew things. This was a very gradual process, but Alice desired that which did not exist. And so she had to create it. And Chez Panisse, by the early 1980s, had changed everything. the chickens, the eggs, the vegetables hadn't existed. There was no bread. Steve Sullivan started cooking in the kitchen. He was a busboy. Said, go for it, do what you want. And he became Acme Bread. And all of a sudden there was bread. People were astonished. And this is when Mr. Pete moved in. He moved in 1966. And we discovered coffee. We thought Folgers was coffee. And we discovered to our astonishment that Folgers was sawdust. And so what we found is that Pete's coffee was wonderful. It tasted like coffee. It tasted the way coffee smells. And we just went on from there.
So there have been a number of people, Chez Panisse, that, you're talking about a man that started as a busboy and ended up, how many bakeries around the Bay Area. Others went on to establish really important restaurants, Coyote Cafe and Santa Fe, Zuni Cafe in San Francisco. It seems like, there was cookbook research. There was Alice's time in France, where she, learned about French cooking. But there was something of a playful and improvisational spirit at Chez Panisse.
Yes.
That would not have been, probably the spirit at some other restaurants at the time.
There wasn't any. We went with some of our friends, Claude Michel Lebrun and Martine Kuhn. We went to a fancy French restaurant in San Francisco, maybe Les Trois, I can't quite remember the name. But they refused us service. They wouldn't seat us. And we were, of course, insulted. But that taught us everything we needed to know about the establishment. We didn't want to have anything to do with it. It didn't want to have anything to do with us.
And so maybe let's back up a little bit to the free speech movement and your time at Cal, and what happened in the aftermath of the arrests at Sproul, and then your entrance into the printing industry. Did you apprentice? Was it formal like that, or you were taught? How did you learn printing?
Well, let's start with your earlier question. I was involved with the free speech movement by getting expelled. I was one of the 8 students who was expelled. And I had nothing better to do than to make the establishment's life miserable. So I did that. Then, of course, we accomplished our ends and goals. And I apprenticed with Marion Syrek, who was a printing pressman. And he taught me how to run a printing press.
So then you had the means of production for exercise free speech.
Well, we exercised other people's speech. I didn't exercise any of my free speech. I just printed what they wanted printed. Becoming a halfway decent printer, the first thing I really printed was that cookbook, the 30 recipes suitable for framing. And some of my earlier posters while I was still working here at Berkeley Graphic Arts. And to everyone's astonishment, it seemed to be filling a need that we had not known existed. That, the posters, who knew? So I began printing what myself had designed.
And there was a certain period when you were, putting those posters up out and around Berkeley.
For very briefly, we found that they disappeared off the telephone poles as quickly as we put them up. So we didn't do that anymore.
Okay. Tell me about some of the other people that were involved. I mean, you had been a calligraphy teacher before becoming a printer. And
well, almost at the same time, really.
Okay.
I started printing in 1965.
And then where were you teaching?
Through the Free University in Berkeley.
Okay.
Which was a sort of an imaginary offshoot. I briefly taught through the university back when they allowed people who didn't have degrees to teach. But I taught calligraphy for, I don't know, about 5 years.
And then some of your students became interested in printing as
Yes.
well.
Pat Curtin was one of them. Lucy Dines, James Monday were some of my very first students, and they did exceedingly well. Pat Curtin has designed a number of the books for Chez Panisse, and she developed a technique for making multicolor block prints. That's very beautiful.
Did you ever print any menus?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I printed the very first menu, which was extremely elaborate. And as it turned out, on the first night, there was only one thing ready to eat. So we realized that cooking one thing, just like at home, is exactly what we're going to do. And so this whole elaborate menu was completely useless. And Chez Panisse began serving, one meal only at one price. And it was a wonderful solution that no one else seemed to have hit on.
Chez Panisse is named after a trilogy of films by Marcel Pagnol.
Yes.
Alice's daughter is named after a character from the same trilogy.
Yes.
There were a lot of film people around. You've done posters for the Pacific Film Archive. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the influence of film on the both of your careers.
Well, I like movies.
And filmmakers.
Tom Luddy was a very important person in the early days of Chez Panisse, and also he ran the Pacific Film Archive, for which I did posters. And it was a wonderful arrangement. I got to do anything I wanted to. And so I did posters for movies that I liked.
You got to choose.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they would screen the film for me, and I got to sit in the theater by myself and watch the movies.
Who are some of the filmmakers that were in and around Chez Panisse at the time?
Oh, heavens. I don't really know. I mean, I could think of a long list, but nothing really comes to mind.
Were you at the UC Theater or at Chez Panisse when Herzog fulfilled his bet?
No, I was
to
busy.
Earl Morris?
I was busy printing. Most of the time I would print, and I would get off maybe about 11 o'clock and go have dinner at Chez Panisse.
For some of you that aren't aware of this one, there's a local filmmaker named Les Blank, who was one of the, he was around the restaurant quite a bit.
Definitely.
Who did a movie, short film of Werner Herzog eating his boot. It had been a bet with Errol Morris, who would go on to a number of great films, but that he would not complete The Gates of Heaven, his first film. He did it, and Herzog came through. Alice Waters cooked the boot at Chez Panisse, and Herzog proceeded to eat it at the UC Theater.
Yes.
So that was a time in the, when was that, 1980 or so?
I don't remember.
The restaurant had already had some notoriety, some national attention.
Yes, it's a wonderful thing how Alice taught people how to eat before they didn't know. And I think part of that is because Alice didn't know when she went to France with Eleanor Bertino in 1965. I think it was 65. They had no idea. They didn't know what food was. And when Alice met the little shepherd boy and he divided his tiny meal up amongst the three of them, and when she went to a little restaurant that was a converted mill that served about 6 people, and the wife was the cook and the husband was the chef, the waiter. When it came time for the fish course, he threw a fishing line out the window and caught a fish and showed it to her, flipping around. 5 minutes later, it came out as trout almondine, and this was like St. Paul being knocked off his horse. Alice fell to the ground and woke up a completely different person. She didn't change her name, but she might as well have. When she came back, she was absolutely full of the concept, the idea of food, but she didn't know anything about food. She'd experienced it in France, and here there wasn't any. So she began learning.
And her circles just sort of radiated out and out to, you know,
It was all our friends.
Okay.
It was one thing that happened in Berkeley due to the free speech movement and the anti-war movement and the civil rights movement is that we formed a community. We were people who had done things together. You know, 100 of us had been arrested together. We formed a very strong community, and when one of us in the community tried something, we all supported it. When Alice opened her restaurant with no knowledge whatsoever, everyone said, great, this is a great idea. You want to open a restaurant, you don't know anything and you don't have any money. Well, that's fine. We'll be there.
So there's something, you know, very regional and very local about both of your,
yes, extremely. Yeah.
You know, maybe you can talk about some of the other, you know, local businesses at that time that, you know, blossomed into big ideas.
Well,
and you did Pete's Coffee poster. And
one of my first clients was Velosport Bicycles, which is right across the street. And most of my clients have been local. There are a few people who aren't local, but that's because they were local and moved. Basically, I'm a taste that Berkeley seems to have, and it doesn't seem to go anywhere else. You know, nobody. We like us.
I've seen some posters about the Los Angeles Library.
But that was a Berkeley person.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So, you know, many of your posters are, you know, for food and drink establishments around here.
No, it's just Chez Panisse.
Well, Pete's Coffee and
Well, that's a little different.
you know, roasteries and distilleries.
Yeah,
and,
coffee, wine, spirits.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about your participation. I mean, to some degree, you really set the visual vocabulary of the restaurant, and you know, I mean, with Pat Curtin's, you know, development of that. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the Chez Panisse cookbook and you know, what that meant for the restaurant, as well as.
I designed the first cookbook. Basically, it was, we've been fortunate, and Alice has been fortunate in finding book publishers who seem to want to leave her alone and let her do what she wants, which is the wisest possible course with Alice. She definitely knows what she wants, and she doesn't want anything else. So when, you know, when we work with her, when I work with her, she sort of suggests a particular direction, and I go in that direction.
For the posters as well as for the book? I mean, is she
actually usually
engaged in?
Usually with the posters, the first time she sees the posters when it's finished.
Okay.
She occasionally gets in there before it's finished and it does a little input. This most recent poster, she wanted gold on it, which I hadn't thought of. So we put gold on it.
And maybe you can talk a little bit about where you find inspiration. I mean, you've done, how many of these posters have you done? I would love
to be able to tell you, but I don't know. The muse hangs out and she does what she wants. And I kind of take dictation.
Let's see, I've noticed that, you know, part of, you know, you have your bibliography on your website, or catalog resume, I guess you would say. And you're constantly citing influences.
Yes.
It seems to me that, Alice does the same thing with her, with the people and the books that have influenced her. It's really sort of a dialogue.
Well, it's important to remember that the world was here before you were born, and you're taking a part of it and you're expanding it, but you didn't really make anything up yourself. What Alice has done is rediscovered fresh food. And after World War II, when everything good came out of cans, we'd forgotten what food tasted like. And my sources are myriad. I very consciously cite my sources. I don't pretend that I come up with things all by myself, because I don't.
But that's part of being a craftsman. You're working in a tradition.
Yes.
And I feel that Alice Waters is working in a tradition as well.
I would say Alice Waters is more creating a tradition. Really, honestly, there was Julia Child. She was very important, mainly because she was cheerful.
And a spy.
Yeah, the famous non-episode where she dropped the chicken on the floor and picks it up and says, "Oh, no one will ever know." It was on live television. No, they're tremendously important influences, but one of my motto and Alice's as well is we want to leave the world better than when we found it. And, we're going to die, and the world will go on without us, and we want it to be better. And make it better.
How about the arts and crafts movement and their focus on using only the best materials? And
William Morris was sort of torn between two worlds, and the world that made him all his money was the one that he didn't like. And he was living in an imaginary Middle Ages where happy craftsmen worked away and were proud of their work. And it was kind of true, but basically he was living in a world of imagination. And what he did is he took this Victorian clutter and the soulless machinery that was creating it and tried to humanize it. And he's a very, very important influence. The revival of calligraphy, his beautiful designs. And that was a very important early influence on me, although I went more toward the Scottish Nouveau with Murdo and Mackintosh, and to some extent the Jugendstil with Ludwig Holbein, Hans Rudy Ert, Julius Klinger. Very strong influences.
How about the sort of resurgence of the fine press in America that was happening in the Bay Area?
Yeah, San Francisco.
There were even some classics of gastronomy included there.
There might be. San Francisco has always been a bit eccentric, and it allows things to happen that wouldn't really happen anywhere else. The beautiful printing that came out of the Bay Area really through the 1950s. We still continue that tradition, although it's increasingly difficult to do so with the modern materials. But basically, we have the Colophon Club here, which is about 100 small presses. All these beautiful old machines that we keep running and pinch our fingers on.
When you were designing the original Chez Panisse cookbook, were you looking back at cookbook designs?
I just have some basic principles that cookbooks you should be able to read them at arm's length, and they should have plenty of places in there for you to put your dirty fingers.
How about the 1960s spawned a whole, genre of protest posters.
Yes.
The Vietnam War.
Well, more importantly, the rock and roll posters.
As well.
Those were printed largely in San Francisco at Tila Trek Studio, and Levon Moscovian was a great sponsor of those.
And those were printed largely by offset?
Yes, they were all printed by offset.
Okay.
2-color.
And then when does silkscreen printing come in for posters?
That was invented in the 1930s. And so far as I know, very little of commercial silkscreen posters has been done. It's slow, it's expensive, and offset lithography is much better suited to that.
Okay. Maybe you can talk about what you've been working on recently.
Well, the most recent poster was for Chez Panisse. I can go get it if you'd like.
Sure, we'd love to see it. How many have now been done for Chez Panisse? Almost 50?
Almost 50. Somehow I didn't hit every single year. This is the most recent poster. Perhaps you can.
Oh, wow.
And,
Well, a little earlier you were talking about how
Not into go towards
the
that one. Yeah, keep going. More.
Alice
More.
Suggested some details on this.
right, she wanted the gold on it.
And that was done, on the offset?
No, that's a separate.
With the stamper?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hot foil stamping.
Okay. 50th anniversary is this year?
Yes. Well, last year, actually.
Okay. Did you ever try your hand at some of the other poster techniques?
I don't quite understand.
Silk screen printing?
No.
Never?
I have a printing press. Why should I mess with anything else?
Should we open up for questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so we have a few questions.
Chloe, we're going to move on to the open questions segment here. So could you
Yeah, can you hear me?
read us some that are coming in by chat?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So we have a few questions on the chat. The first one was at the beginning. I think you mentioned that you were refused service at a fancy French restaurant. Why is that?
They didn't like us. We were too young.
Too young.
We were dressed oddly.
There it is.
Is a good reason.
Yeah, so the two Parisians with us let the maitre d' know, and he was a little bit embarrassed, but he'd made his mind up. He wouldn't serve us.
All right. Another question that we have here is, are you aware that your Auckland Symphony poster appears on the wall of Inspector Morse's Oxford Police Office in the...
You're only the 10,000th person that's told me that.
Well, you have your answer now, Paula. So if anyone has other questions, to pop them in the chat.
We've got a question over the transom here.
Okay.
And that is about the coloring of your posters and the process. You've done some progressive prints. When did you start doing progressive prints? And
Immediately.
okay.
I print by solid color lithography. These are not printed by what's called 4-color process. So each color is printed separately. So the print the first color, which is usually the lightest. In this post, for example, the pale outline, and then the brown, and then the sort of peachy color and salmon, and then a darker one, then a black. And there's no reason not to keep an example of all the colors, so I did.
Did you get to a point where you were trying to challenge yourself with how many times through the press?
No, just sort of automatically. I mean, I think the most I've ever done was 26,
26.
which is crazy.
That is crazy.
I just sort of add colors until I'm done. You know, it's the thing.
I see. So you were kind of discovering the design as you were printing.
To some extent. I mean, one advantage of being the printing pressman is I don't have to explain anything to anybody. I mean, I am the printing pressman, so I just do it until I'm done.
Does anyone help you with the print? I mean, you've taught some people, but when you're working on a poster, it's just you.
Just me.
Okay.
I don't have to talk a lot.
Yeah, we have another comment in the chat. It's someone who's from Toronto, and she said that she's admired your work for a very long time. And she's curious about the cost of printing posters, menus, and printing cookbooks.
The cost?
Yes.
Yeah, the cost of printing posters and menus. And...
Let's start with posters.
I don't quite understand. I don't quite know how to answer that. The biggest cost of most things is labor. And of course, I don't charge myself. Paper is moderately expensive, ink is moderately expensive. But the biggest cost of producing these things would be the labor. I just do it until it's done.
What type of paper do you like to use?
Paper's changed a lot over the years. I'm having trouble getting paper right now. We're having trouble getting everything right now. So I'm kind of, to some extent, having to take what I can get.
Mm-hmm. Is there a certain type of paper that you feel is, especially suited for posters?
Well, the paper has to be able to go through the press a lot of times, and so it's a fairly high quality sheet. The grain direction is important. All these things that are important to me as a printer.
Is handmade printer difficult to run through an offset
I couldn't
machine?
possibly run it.
Okay. Chloe, any more?
There's people saying that they appreciate your craft and they're very proud to own your cookbooks. I'm not sure we have any more questions. Oh, actually, there's one. Why did you call your books Operation at St. Hieronymus?
Why did I name this St. Hieronymus Press?
Yes.
Yes, St. Hieronymus or St. Jerome, that's the Greek version of St. Jerome, was a translator of the Bible from Hebrew and Greek into Vulgar Latin. And he was the patron saint of scribes and calligraphers. So I was a scribe and a calligrapher. So it seemed very logical.
All right.
Well, I think with that last question, we'll just thank you again for your hospitality here.
One more.
All right, in under the wire. The hammer has not come down.
Yeah, so could you talk about your archives and if you have plans to place it somewhere?
Archive?
Archives, yeah.
No, I don't. I'm assuming that my heirs and assignees will take care of it. And I'm not really concerning myself so much with that.
All right. So I think this is where we will close today, unless anyone has any last minute thing they want to pop in the chat. So, we have 31 of these original posters in our next auction on this Thursday. So if you want to check it out, just go on our website. So thank you, David. We're very grateful for you to being part of this course. And
we should also say that David has a website where his material is available for sale as well.
Yeah, so the website is www.goines.net. And also, just so you know, we will have continuing webinar series throughout the year, with different topics related to our auctions. So if you have any interest in topics or in a particular person you'd like to hear speak, just feel free to email us anytime, and we're open to suggestions. So feel free to email us. Thank you for joining us, David, and thank you, Chris, for this great job. And thanks to you all for joining us today. And hopefully we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.